Hey guys, so I've got this book. It's called The Jewish Mind, Raphael, Patiai. I've already read a little bit of it, but we'll go into what is the essence of Jewishness. If, as I have indicated, the Jewish mind has absorbed so many desperate influences from the Gentile environments, the question must inevitably arise as to what, if any, are the essential features which have informed it throughout history. In looking for an answer to this question, we can get some help from the sages of the Talmud, who themselves could look back upon more than 1,000 years of Jewish history. They had definite views on the mental traits which they felt were most characteristically Jewish. Thus, a Talmudic passage puts these words in the mouth of King David. There are 3 traits in this nation. They are compassionate, modest, and charitable. Only he who has these 3 traits is worthy of being admitted into it. Since the Bible does not record any such statement of King David, it is clear that it represents the Talmudic view on what are outstanding characteristics of the Jews. Other Talmudic passages cast similar ideas into different forms and speak of 3 basic things on which the existence of the world, read the Jewish people, depends. The high priest Shim, on the just, who lived in the 3rd or 2nd BCE, used to say, the world stands on these 3 things: Torah, or on the temple service, and on charity. When using the expression the world, he did not, of course, mean the world at large, which bore no relationship to the Torah and to the temple services, but to the Jewish world. One must therefore interpret this saying as meaning that the existence of jewelry depended on the study of the law, the performance of the temple rituals, and the practice of charity. Against this passage, which assigns a pivotal place to ritual, as one would expect of sage, who was also a priest, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, in the first half of the century CE, stated that the 3 things on which the world, this is again jewelry, stood were justice, truth, and peace. 3 moral features which were Jewish only inasmuch as they were made from the fundamentals of the Jewish existence. More famous than these pronouncements is the formation of the great 1st century BCE sage Hillel. When a Gentile came to him saying, "You may make me a proselyte, provided you can teach me the whole Torah while I stand on 1 foot," he answered, "Do not unto others what is hateful to you. This is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and study, that is, Hillel, say the essence of Judaism, and being considerate of others and Gentiles who accept this was admitted by him into the community of Israel." However, I mentioned this here only in passing. Once admitted, he was expected to engage in the major preoccupation of Israel, studying the law. The common denominator in these distillations of the essence of Jewishness, except for the earliest one, on which partly ritualistic, is that they all insist on moral qualities only, nothing else. One can therefore conclude that in Talmudic times, the crucial distinction of sage perceived were on page 9 and some introductory questions and answers. The sages perceived between the nations of the world, this is mainly Greek and Roman, and the Jews were neither in ritual nor in creedal, but in moral realm. They considered the Jews the moral people par excellence. A Gentile could join the Jewish community by accepting the Jewish morality. Hillel's formulation of the essence of the Torah is, of course, but a recasting into negative form of what in the Bible itself appears as a positive commandment: "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." It is remarkable and characteristic of the direction of the development of Judaism took in the Talmudic times that it was the commandment which was considered the whole Torah, rather than the complementary one which imposes the duty of Amar Day: "Thou shalt love thy Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might." The second is thou shalt love, is incidentally part of the Shema prayer, which daily has been a religious duty for Jews for at least 2,000 years. The two commandments of love are therefore unquestionably traditional, essential of Judaism. That were so considered is amply attested by the rich religious literature which the Jews have produced throughout their history. Only in modern times did this emphasis in isolating the essential features of Jewishness shift from the love aspect to the feeling of belongingness. The core of Jewishness was not conceived as a national consciousness, as an innermost commitment to Jewish identity, which was also considered the key to the secret of Jewish survival. One of the many who expressed this thought was Bernard Lazare, 1865 to 1903, the outstanding French Jewish author and defender of Dreyfus. He wrote that the Jews survived because they preserved tenaciously and forcefully vivance et vivante, their national consciousness. One of the contemporary writers, he wrote the Jewish survived because of their preserved tenacious and forcefully vivance et vivante, their national consciousness. One of the contemporary writers who expressed the same. Page 10, preliminaries. Idea is David Hayter, Ferdinand Zweig. The core of Judaism is a belief in Israel and the will to Judaism, which is the source of the miraculous survival. The psychologist's view of Jewish endurance was enriched by Christian historians and theologians with a mystical note. Heinrich von Haller, a foremost German philosopher of history, emphasized that there was a bond which unified Israel, and which was not simply the bond of flesh and blood, nor of the etho-historical community, but a super-historical sacred bond of promise and yearning. The same idea was expressed by the Catholic philosopher Jacques Maritain in saying that Jewish thought is all aware that Israel is a corpus mysticum, a mystical body, which none of these thinkers speaks of the core of Jewishness as such. It is clear that for them the Jewish awareness of existence of a unified sacred bond which makes Israel into a mystical body is the essential feature of Jewishness. The reason for these and such other modern views about the essence of Jewishness are unsatisfactory is that they are applicable to the Jews only in certain times and certain conditions. Jewish national consciousness The reason that these are such modern views of the essence of Jewishness are unsatisfactory is that they are applicable to the Jews only in certain times and certain conditions. Jewish national consciousness certainly could not exist in times prior to the emergence of nationalism in the Western world, and ever thereafter it remained foreign to the Jews which lived in the Muslim orbit. As the sacred bond and mystical body, such concepts snack more of Christianity than of the down-to-earth Jewish view of the relationship between man and man and man and God. In my own search for the core of Jewishness, I was led by two basic considerations. I felt that any trait, in order to be pronounced as essential, must meet two criteria. It must be an irreducible minimum, and it must have informed the Jewish mind at all times and in all places. It seems to me that two beliefs and two duties meet these requirements. They are the beliefs in that the belief in the special relationship between God and Israel, the duty toward God, and the duty toward one's fellow man. The two duties, as we have seen, were given early concrete formulations to the two biblical in pithy, general, and explicit statements similar to those referring to the two duties of love just mentioned, but while remaining unexpressed. Both were taken for granted and implicit in the biblical pronouncement based on them. Not only until late in the First Temple period do we find the Bible imperative, believe in the Lord your God, reported to have been uttered by Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, in an exhortation in his army before a decisive battle. All the 10 commandments, except for the first, are cast in the form of thou shalt or thou shalt not. The first, instead of saying thou shalt believe in me, merely says, I am the Lord thy God, who brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Maimonides, the great medieval biblical commentator, aware of the formal deviation represents of the first commandment when compared to the other 9, explains this commandment is a positive precept. It means, I am the Lord, which teaches and commands Israel to know and to believe in the Lord. Similarly, a belief in a special relationship between God and Israel is not demanded explicitly in the Bible, but it is an underlying axiom of much that is said about Israel's duties toward God. The Bible also refers to the election of Israel by God, an election, to be sure, not to a privileged position, but to serving God. In a great passage in Deuteronomy, the doctrine is explained in detail. God chose Israel, the smallest of all people, because he loved Israel. Hence, Israel is a holy people unto the Lord and must love God and keep his commandments. In the other biblical passage, too, the two idea, Israel's chosenness and its duty to serve God and observe the law, are casually interconnected. And to me, the children of Israel are servants. They are my servants, whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt. The same idea is poetically expressed in the book of Isaiah. Though Israel my servant, Jacob whom I have chosen, I said to thee, thou art my servant. And reciprocally, Israel chose God to serve him. Ye have chosen you, the Lord, to serve. In Talmudic times, Israel's chosenness was felt to be a status, had literally forced upon it, as the Midrash puts it. When God revealed the law on Mount Sinai, he lifted up the mountain, held it over the head of the people, and said to them, if you accept the Torah, it is well. If not, here will be your burial. In the Middle Ages, in vastly different circumstances, Maimonides felt that a formulation of Jewish credos was required, and when he undertook to do so in the famous 13 principles of faith, he included explicitly the belief in the one God and implicitly the belief in special relationship between God and Israel. Throughout Israel's history, its chosenness has always remained an obligation, a duty, a yoke to be carried, never a privilege to be frivolously enjoyed, but has to also become the religious, mystical, and emotional ground of Israel's enduring existence in the world. From biblical times down to the present, of the essence of Judishness has compromised the same 4 basic features, the same 2 behavioral and 2 creedal demands. Any person, whether or not born to Jewish parents who accepted them and submitted to them, was a Jew and belonged to the Jewish community, which therefore can be described as the aggregate of all those individuals who subscribe to these 4 tenets. Because of the irreducible nature of these 4 elements, wherever the Jews absorbed from their Gentile environment was never until the Enlightenment also to encroach upon them. They remain the Jewish elixir of life, the source of Israel, elan vital et leitmotif of Jewish essence, always clearly recognizable, even though they played in many different keys, to the changing rhythm and on the variations of instruments, whether in book I refer to. The core or the essence of Jewishness, or to the Jewish content. These 4 elements are what I have in mind. Are there constant in the Jewish mind? 7. Are there constants in the Jewish mind? In the inner core of Jewishness, comprised of the 2 duties and 2 beliefs just discussed, constitutes a constant. In the Jewish mind, which has been formed by throughout Jewish history despite their incessant exposure to the outsider influences, the Jews remain in this sense fundamentally true to themselves. at least until the Enlightenment, whatever components of the foreign religious thought and practice they adopted from the Canaanites, the Zoroastrian, Iranians, the polytheistic or philosophical Greeks, the Muslims, Arabs, and Persians, or the Christian Europeans. The traditional Jewish religion continues in its own evolutionary course through the ages, and while it has been tinged, it was never transformed by these external influences in making their adjustments to the social forms and norms, to the cultural orientations and occupational structures of their Gentile neighbors, and their ever-widening dispersion, both in the lands of the Muslim East and of the Christian West. They also always remained, their integral cohesion and consistency remained the carriers of complete self-contained and all-compassing Jewish religious culture. Whatever the degree of autonomy granted to it, the Jewish community continued to function as a framework for what all Jews knew to be their traditional way of life, even if Gentile values succeeded in penetrating the psychological barriers of the separate and self-contained Jewish existence. They could never amount to more than manageable modifications in the traditional Jewish value system, whose basic remained untouched, unaltered, undiluted. Is there such a thing as a global Jewish influence? There is a crucial question to which many distorted answers have been given. The answer is not many case affirmations range from the wide, rabidly anti-Semitic to those which amount to unrestrained ethno-religious self-aggrandizement. On the one hand, there are those who believe that the Tsarist fabrication known as the Protocols of the Elder of Zion, recently recited by the Arab enemies of Israel, that the Jews form a global cabal, a sinister, secret, and incredible powerful conspiracy which somehow can and does work its will upon mankind all over the world. Among those who followed the paranoid path of this argument were otherwise intelligent men who had a blind spot only when it came to the Jews. The 19th century examples are known to mention in the present century. Such beliefs supplied fuel to the Nazi genocide. To Carrizo Calderon, Argentina, Judea published in 1975 the ranting about Jewish synarchy which dominates the world, and the mutatis mutandis is such fantasy-filled but not quite harmless books of Roger Pereffi Les Juifs, Juifs. On the other hand, there is also a Jewish overestimate of the global significance of the Jews. This goes back to Talmudic times when some sages were convinced that the whole world existed only for the sake of Israel, and that conversely, the existence of the whole world depended on Israel's fulfilling the role of the religious function allotted to it by God. A late faint echo of this view could be found in the teachings of Reform Judaism in their classical form, which date from the 19th century, and which mainly maintained that while Judaism was nothing but a religion, it had a global mission to spread the faith of pure ethical monotheism all over the world. A more restrained but no less strong pro-Jewish view is that the one embraced by a number of modern historians who have presently eloquently and in considerable detail the Jewish contributions to civilization. Essentially, these books consist of systematic enumerations and evaluations of the work of outstanding Jewish writers, poets, artists, musicians, scholars, scientists, industrialists, economists, legal experts, statesmen, and the like. Especially in the modern times, they show, among the other things, that in all the occupations mentioned, the Jews have achieved such since emancipation a considerable overrepresentation that their influence has been disproportionately large, but the influence of the Jewish mind transcends the sum total of these individual achievements. These are the views and conceptions of man, of life and fate, of human quiddity and destiny, of what is certain ornamental philosophies is called suchness, and which have spread over almost the entire globe, prefiguring or perhaps serving as the basis for a Chardin-like non-sphere Not only have the Jews contributed most significantly to this global network of views and their underlying Wat and Shang, they have done so to an extent not duplicated or ever approximated by other people, as Ernest von de Haag observed. Jews are human. We are all, but Jews are in the sense more human than anyone else. They have witnessed and taken part in more of the human career. They have recorded more of it, shaped more of it, originated and developed more of it, above all suffered more of it, and they than any other people. No other nation has witnessed so much, argued and bargained so much, and yet clung to its own inner core as much as the Jews have. The lives of all of us in the West and as in Russia and even of vast areas in the rest of the world have been strongly influenced, if not altogether shaped, by the views of the human fate, which is essentially Jewish in the cast and origin. Jewish influence continues not only through our common religious heritage, page 14, preliminaries, which clearly bears the mark of its Jewish origins, but also through the constant addition of new non-religious ideas produced by Jewish scientists and scholars. The Jewish ability to create ideas and values destined to influence the majority of mankind testifies to the extraordinary capacity for transference of precisely the greatest products of the Jewish mind, their universal human appeal, their propensity of becoming the property of all and most of mankind. Through the two great world religions of Christianity, initiated by the Jewish Jesus and established by the Jewish disciples, and Islam, developed by Arab Muhammad under the impact of Jewish teaching, Jews' thoughts have radiated out in ever-widening circles around the globe and changed man and his world. After achieving religious insights which have conquered a major part of mankind, the Jews were for 2,000 years prevented by Gentile oppression and their own reaction to it from bringing forth new globally influential ideas. But even so, they produced a Maimonides in the 12th century, considered one of the two greatest minds of the Middle Ages, and Spinoza in the 17th, regarded as the greatest modern philosopher. And no sooner were they emancipated than to the 19th century that they returned most energetically to the age-old Jewish specialization of changing the conceptual framework of humankind. The teachings of Marx, who was called a later-day Jewish prophet, speak in phenomenal speed, especially outside the modern Western world. Until today, Marxism can claim about as many adherents as Christianity and Islam together. Psychoanalysis, created by the Viennese Jewish physician Sigmund Freud, and from both a therapy and the basic approach to man and his work, Albert Einstein, a German Jew, not only influenced more than any other modern scientist the development of both the warlike and its peaceful utilization of the atomic power, and by opening up a new understanding of the world of energy and matter, and thus of the entire physical universe. So, to put it perhaps somewhat hyperbolically, the 20th century views of the socio-economic dynamics of the inner forces of the human psyche and of the physical universe all contain major Jewish pronounced components, without naming the many dozen Jewish geniuses who appear as stars of secondary magnitude only in the relation to such luminaries of the human race as Moses, Isaiah, Jesus, Maimonides, Spinoza, Marx, Freud, Einstein. One can generalize and assert that apart from some isolation areas of the globe which are shrinking daily, all mankind today is affected in one way or the other by the product of the Jewish mind, and one may add, no other human group can boast of even remotely comparable record. That is the end of preliminaries, and we are on chapter 2, Who is a Jew? I will stop for now.